What is like a typical day like for you personally?
Oh my God, it's almost back to back the entire day with customer meetings, internal meetings, meetings with, you know, technical team to give like product feedback internally, building in Clay. So day to day is back to back, very chaotic.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stella Garber. I am the co founder and CEO of Hoop, which is a new AI task manager that captures tasks automatically across tools like email, Slack, and meetings. And I'm here with one of our customers, Alex Lindahl, who is a GTM engineer at Clay. So, Alex, first of all, what is a GTM engineer? And for the 10 people who maybe haven't heard about Clay, what is Clay?
Clay is, we just announced another round of funding and we're
Congrats.
calling ourselves a go-to-market development environment, similar to software. You have an IDE. We want this to be a go-to-market development environment. And so what that means is we have all these different ways of gathering data from like 100 different data providers and integrations. And then we also have agents that can go out and automate manual research. So we bring all that data in and organize that in different ways. But then within the platform, you can create all sorts of different automations, workflows, orchestrate across different tools. And so you can start to almost build like a custom app that does something for you. For example, I'm using one tool to listen for keywords on LinkedIn. And then when that keyword is picked up, it sends the post into Clay and that person. I enrich it, find the email, find the person's information. I classify that post into, is this like a job opportunity or is this like AI thought leadership? And then from there, Clay will create an email that's personalized. And then I send that email out to like another tool. And so that's all automated. And then in the back end and the output, I'm getting new subscribers to one of my newsletters, which is pretty neat. So that's like an example of bringing in data, analyzing it, creating something, sending it out, having it all automated, and then getting to like an end result. Back
So
to your
cool.
question about, yeah, what a GTM engineer is. Here at Clay, it's basically half sales, half solution engineering. So we're more technical than the typical sales rep. The goal is to combine the role so that sales rep isn't having to go and hunt down a technical answer. We can just answer it and actually do the thing in the product. At other organizations, I would say a GTM engineer is more doing stuff like internally at that company and
Mm.
is taking RevOps almost like the next level where they're working cross departmentally to create workflows, automations to drive like go to market outcomes.
And it sounds like, AI and figuring out how to use AI effectively across tools and use cases is a big part of your day. Is that right? And I should let you, so the two newsletters that you talk about, do you want to just mention what those are?
Yeah, totally. So one is called claymation.io, and that's I publish weekly a step-by-step guide on, for example, that workflow that I just mentioned. I basically just geek out on trying lots of new tools, create workflows, automations, and a lot of stuff that I hear from customers. I try and create like a guide for that so then I can use that to help that customer or just the audience. And then the other is actually the augmentedseller.com, which is how to apply AI within a seller's daily workflow and to help sellers sell more effectively and use AI to augment what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a lot of fun because using a lot of prompt engineering and there's just so much happening in this space. A lot of people are struggling to keep up and a lot of people are just struggling to figure out, okay, well, which one do I use? And then how do I integrate it into the work into like my daily workflow so that it has like the biggest impact?
I mean, that's like, I feel like I'm constantly thinking about that. And I know it's very top of mind for so many people because you hear about how AI is supposed to make you productive. And then I think you're constantly feeling that your workflow is suboptimal or could be
Mm-hmm.
optimized in some way. What does, and especially with Clay being so, growing so quickly, what is like a typical day like for you personally?
Oh my God, it's almost back to back the entire day with customer meetings, internal meetings, meetings with, you know, technical team to give like product feedback internally, building in Clay. So day-to-day is back to back, very chaotic, lots going on, lots of details. And then I come home, make dinner for the family, spend time with my toddler, and then I kind of go back to either finishing up the day's work, where I'm trying to like remember like everything that happened, or go through my to-do list to figure out what did I miss, what could I not get to during the day. Obviously try and do some of those things, and then also noodle around and try different AI products.
So how are you sort of staying on top of everything that you need to do? What are your current either like practices or tools or ways that you're keeping your sanity in this sort of crazy environment?
Yeah, so I rely on Hoop as my like ultimate safety net, because we're constantly getting pinged on Slack, so it grabs like all the Slack kind of like action items, which I tend to like miss because when you're on calls all day, like then at the end of the day, like there's so many channels. So Slack, Zoom calls, and then email. And so it makes sure that I just don't drop the ball on really important things. And then it's really easy to go back and kind of sort through all of those action items and then categorize them based on priority and stuff like that. But yeah, that's been a game changer, because now I don't have the kind of worry or anxiety that, oh, there's all this happening in this Slack channel and 5 customers got back to me today needing X, Y, and Z, the multitude of different tasks coming from every call. And so that's just brought into one place, and that's super helpful. And it's all automated.
Awesome. Anything else that helps you? Do you time block at all? Do you have any frameworks for how you tackle your to-do list?
Yeah, so first I'll kind of look at the to-do list, figure out what I'm gonna like go and do or prioritize. And then I really like to take the transcripts of those calls or like the context, and then use something like Google Notebook LM, or a custom chat GPT that will either create like a email in my voice and tone, or Google Notebook LM, you can do cool stuff and have it, have a output that's custom, or even put a bunch of different calls from, maybe I had like 10 calls with a customer, put it all in that, have it synthesize, and even create like a 5-minute brief podcast I could like listen to on the way to work. So there's like all these like cool.
Do you actually do that?
Yeah, I've done that, because like so I created one that was, first I was like, is this possible? Uploaded all this content about Clay's path to product market fit. Wasn't sure what to expect, but it was super realistic. It was like engaging, and it had like all of the content. And then I put it out there, and I got feedback on it too, that people actually listened to the whole thing. This was like, I don't know, like 10, 15 minutes. So I was like, wow, this turned out like a lot better than I thought. And to kind of synthesize a lot of stuff, understand it, and then, go do something with it, or prepare for like a meeting, a quick like 5-minute conversation while I'm standing in the subway. It's pretty cool to be able to do. So I'm experimenting with all these different ways of using AI and trying to figure out what's the best workflow for a specific type of activity.
Yeah. Well, let's dive into that, because I feel like you mentioned that workflow with the LinkedIn and growing your newsletter base. I guess what have been some of your favorite workflows that you've figured out that make you either more productive or sort of help you level up in the way that AI is supposed to be helping us, be, like you said, the augmented seller, I guess, augmented humans.
Yeah. So there's a couple that, and I can't take credit for some of these because we build a lot of these internally.
Sure.
One is, before a call, there's a Clay table that's automated that goes and does all this research on the company and people, and then creates a Notion briefing doc. So before the call, I'm not going into LinkedIn and looking up the company and doing all this other stuff. It's just, boom, here's the company. This is what they do. This is how big it is. This is recent news. This is what products they offer, how they make money. And then at the person level, it's like, these are the 3 people. This is their title, how long they've been there. what their potential role or interests are. And that's just like, great to go into a call instead of doing all this other stuff.
Yeah.
Just 5 minutes before the call, read through that and boom, ready to go. So that's a good one. Same thing with post call follow up. The company uses Gong for like the call recordings, but we can create a custom workflow where instead of using the Gong kind of meeting analysis, I haven't found that to be exactly the way I want it. So we send that into a Clay table. We use custom prompts to like parse out the parts that we're most interested in, and then
Mm-hmm.
have it create like a follow-up email that we can just fine tune, tweak, and then send back to like the customer. So that's another great one. Actually, for growing the newsletter, everyone signs up for, they sign up using their email. I have that sent from Beehive into a Clay table. It enriches all that person's information. And then I use another tool to auto send a connect request and a thank you message to that person on LinkedIn. And then that's almost like a growth loop because I'm building the audience, then they see more content, they start to like and engage more of the content, and then that content gets more exposure and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another one for like the newsletter.
Do you find that do people realize that these are sort of AI written connection requests or emails? And I think some people worry that, and I've seen some examples of, on LinkedIn, people will post, look at this AI generated sales email. So I'm just curious how you think about that. Do you sort of human in the loop check everything, or has it gotten to a point where you don't need to?
Yeah, so for this, I get kind of two responses. One is generic, they don't even realize it happened automatically or there was any AI behind it. And then the other is like, wow, did you just automate this process? Because that happened really fast and that was kind of cool. How did you do that? For the personalization of like messages, I kind of think of it in like three different buckets. One, like you can hard code, the message, write it as you normally would. On the other extreme, you have AI generate the entire thing. If you do that, you really need to have like a good prompt and really run it through a lot of tests. And then you have something in between where you have part of your own writing. Maybe that's the value prop that you want to make sure it comes across in a very specific way. And then you can have AI generate snippets. And for those snippets, you have a very custom prompt that's finely tuned. So I like to do something like in the middle, a combination of my own writing plus augmenting it with like a little bit of AI. But I don't want to completely rely on AI because it's good, but I don't completely trust it yet to, get the message exactly the way I want it.
And this prompt tuning and iteration that you're doing, is that directly in Clay, or are you using ChatGPT, or what are you using for that?
Yeah, so a couple things. One is in Clay, I'll run that prompt against like say 10 different rows of information or a person, and then look at those different kind of outputs to see how consistent it is. There's also a way to kind of meta prompt within Clay. So type in the type of prompt that you want, the output that you want, and then it'll generate a more detailed prompt. And then other times if I'm trying to figure out a certain way of doing something, like does a company use a certain type of technology and are there any like breadcrumbs that we could pick up to figure that out? For example, would this be a piece of technology that would need to be listed on a sub-processor? So then I would go into Perplexity and I'd be like, hey, is this possible? And then if so, walk me through the process of how you would actually go about figuring that out. And then I would take that information, feed it into like ChatGPT and be like, create a prompt for me or use Claude and then kind of like iterate on that back and forth.
So it sounds like you're using a lot of different tools. What's your suggestion? And obviously, like your job and maybe sort of your interest, you're like a pioneer sort of in this figuring out figuring out these workflows. And obviously with Clay, there's so much you can do. For someone who is just getting started, or maybe they use ChatGPT, they see the value, they use Claude, but something like setting up a Clay table is a little daunting. What's your advice? And do you really think through workflows do you need to know what the workflow is before you get started, or do you just sort of tinker as you go along?
Yeah, so I learned this from Yash. He was one of the first GTM engineers at Clay. And his advice, and I give this out to all people, is like think about what you would do manually to accomplish that end result. And then figure out how would you do each step or how would you automate each step. And so that creates an easier way to go and actually create some automation that's going to get you that result. So I'd recommend that. And then I think there's actually some pretty cool games. Like this would probably be the easiest way to get into prompt engineering. There's a game by Google, and basically it gives you a picture. You have to describe the picture, which would be your prompt, and then it gives you a score on how close you were to the actual prompt that created the image. And then from there, it gives you a couple tips on how to improve that prompt.
Cool.
So it's kind of like a fun way of just learning how to do prompts, and you realize, and then you start to uncover or learn some of these best practices, like how to be specific, how to
Yep.
give that AI a persona,
Context.
and so
Yep.
on. So that's like an easy one that's just kind of like fun to do.
Got it. How about so that seems like kind of prompting 101. How do you get from that to like building a clay table and automating these outreach things? Do you recommend like using a prescribed workflow that you find maybe on Clay's blog or something, or somewhere on the internet, or even asking the LLM, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, so since I'm playing around all the time, I'm also working with a lot of other technologies and meeting with the founders, and so I'm just exposed to a lot of new ideas. So, for example, with Letter Drop, that's the one that automates listening for keywords on LinkedIn. They had published a really cool workflow, so I was like, oh, let me go try and recreate this because that could be useful. And I saw it and I was like, oh, I could apply this in a slightly different way. That could be helpful to me. So for my newsletter claymation.io, I'm trying to provide a lot of fun, interesting step-by-step guides of how to recreate some of these things. And so I think there's a lot of great resources out there. For example, a Clay, like online university and cohort program. There's also a page with tons of Clay books, which you can just copy a Clay
Books.
table.
That's good.
Yeah, and then just go off and run with that. So there's a lot of stuff out there that you can just go and copy, and then through that, learn how to create.
Well, any sort of last thoughts on how you find tools or how to evaluate what's a good workflow, and sort of like if you were really excited about this conversation, how could you take it to the next level?
So probably not the best advice, but I subscribe to a lot of newsletters.
Okay.
And so I just skim through those, and then all
Yeah.
of a sudden something catches my eye. I'm like, oh, let me go doodle on that for like a little while. Same with like YouTube. That's how I learned about Google Notebook LM. That turned into, you know, a night of playing around, creating AI generated podcasts and all that. And then the gears start turning. And then as you start to play with all these different components and tools, then your brain kind of naturally starts to figure out, okay, this is how I can connect these dots to create something new that's like helpful.
Wait, are there any newsletters that you recommend, or your favorites off the top of your head?
Let's see, I should probably provide a list because I've been curating this list of, especially for go-to-market people. So I have a newsletter, for example, like RevOps Impact that goes over automations for RevOps. There's another one like Connected GTM, which is on HubSpot, like automations. Obviously, the augmentedseller.com focusing on like AI and sales. But I have like a list of these, and each one aligns to a different part of go-to-market. Another one, The Curious Marketer's Guide to Everything.
Oh, I don't know
That's
that
it.
one. Okay.
Yeah, that's a new one that just popped up, and it has a lot of good content that you skim, find something, and you're like, oh, I gotta go check that out because I hadn't like seen that thing before. And then there's like some psychology is wrapped into it to explain why this works behind the scenes.
Cool. I'll definitely check that out. Okay, so one last question, which is, things are moving super fast. It's like you get whiplash every other day if you're building an AI or paying attention
Yeah.
to what's going on. What do you think? Where are we in the adoption cycle for business? And I think specifically Clay has been so I think early and is one of the early like breakaway or really expanding what's possible with GTM. So where do you think we are in like the adoption cycle for AI tooling?
I actually think we're like still like very early on. Like we just got a modem to the internet and we're learning like what's actually possible. So, and I hear this all the time, like, hey, what can I automate? What can I use AI for? I feel like
Mm-hmm.
people dabble for it, but then not necessarily bake it into their workflows and use consistently,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe it's ad hoc. So I think we're still pretty early, both from an entire company adopting AI and then also at the individual level. But it's happening and it's starting to happen really fast, I think.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we definitely see it. Well,
Yeah,
thank you so much, Alex. Maybe you can send me some of those newsletters or Clay
totally.
workflows and I'll include that. But thank you so much for your time.
Great. Thanks, Stella.